Other people see in you what you don't see in yourself. And when they see it in you, believe them. Because I didn't believe it at first. I said no. I can't even imagine what would happen if she had taken that no and said, okay, I'll find someone else.
Hello and welcome to the Unlock Lab. I'm so glad you're here. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I am Tosca DiMatteo, the founder of Tosca Coaching and Consulting, and I do the work at the intersection of personal growth and professional breakthroughs. So if you're interested in a keynote speaker or one-on-one coaching, feel free to visit coachtosca.com. I am thrilled for you to meet my guest today, Julie Brown, who is an expert on networking. She's also the author of This Shit Works, a no-nonsense guide to networking your way to more friends, more adventures, and more success. Let me tell you, I read this book front to back. I heard Julie speak in person, and I just knew she was someone I wanted you to meet because I think she has such incredible, real advice and tips and mindset information that will help you to make your 2025 your best year yet. And I friggin' mean that, because in order for us to achieve all the things we want to achieve and to enjoy this life that we have to live, we get to do it with other people. We don't have to do it alone. And the people we surround ourselves with is a big part of how we get to where we want to be. And so I'm excited for you to have a few new tools in your toolbox. So without any further ado, let me just say, welcome, Julie.
Well, Tosca, thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. Happy New Year or happy February or happy Valentine's Day, whenever this comes out. As you mentioned, I'm Julie Brown, and I really am a one-trick pony. There's not much else to me besides networking. Outside of work, there's a lot. But as far as my job, my goal is to teach everybody the transformative power of networking, especially women, because networking creates competitive advantages, full stop. Like, that is full stop, fact, not opinion. Competitive advantages are yours if you learn how to network and you learn how to use your network strategically.
Yes. Part of what I love to hear, right? Because you're so passionate with anybody, right? It's like, why? Why is this something that you just can talk about ad nauseum? Where does it come from?
It comes from the lived experience, to be honest. No one goes to college and gets a bachelor's or a master's in networking, which I think they should. I think everybody should have to take a networking course in college. And actually, the Wall Street Journal last year said one of the top 5 tools for recent grads that they need that they're not getting in college is networking skills. For me, the power of networking, the transformative power, the career-changing powers, the life-changing powers of networking really came from the lived experience. I mean, I gotta be honest, I was a great student. I wasn't the best. I was a good athlete. I wasn't the best. Like, I was never the best at anything. And you know that old adage, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Like, that kind of played out in my career. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I went to school. I graduated with a degree. I never did anything with it. I kind of floundered around for a little while trying to figure out what I wanted to be. And the more I went through this career, which I ended up falling into the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, which I stayed in for 17 years, what I realized was the more people I met, the more relationships I had, the more people who were invested in my success, the more successful I was. That took a while for me to realize. And it really came to a head, which I talk about in the book. It really came to a head in 2010 after I'd been in the corporate world for about 12 years. 2010, for people who don't know, we're still in a recession, bottom of the market. Again, in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, there's a 55% unemployment rate. I am married to an architect, so we're both in this terrible industry. For those who don't know, the recession started in the subprime mortgage collapse, which was the housing market. So if you're in construction, you were hit even harder. My husband decided in 2010 he was going to quit his job and start an architecture firm, which is like, yay, let's do that. Great idea. But then I thought about it and I said, well, if we can make it now, if we can start in this shit economy, we'll never have a problem getting business. And that's when I turned to my network, which I wasn't even calling it my network then in 2010. That's when I turned to them and said, hey, me and Chris are doing this. Do you know anybody who needs an architect? I just picked up the phone every single day and called people. And the goodwill that I had created over the 12 years, being a good person, being there for people, being helpful, it returned in spades. And when people were still laying architects off, my husband was hiring their architects because we were so busy. And I was doing this for his firm at the same time. I was still working full time at another architecture, non competing architecture firm. That was the light bulb moment for me. I was like, this is not about what you know, it is about who you know and who is invested in your success. Caveat to that, you can't be shit at your job, okay? Like, barrier to entry, be good at your job, be talented, but realize that that is a barrier to entry. Everybody is good at the job. Everybody is talented. No dummies are graduating college, just skating by. You have to be good at your job. Barrier to entry. The change mechanism is your network.
First of all, thank you for sharing that. I love hearing like career transformation stories. I love hearing about the journey of the messy middle and the inspiration that it's like if you could build what you built at the time that you did, which is, quote unquote, the wrong time, not the right time, right? The time is what's best for you, right? I say this all the time, but you have to honor what's in your heart to do and when it feels right for you. So kudos to the courage for both you and your husband to do that. And I mean, the way that you talked about it was just like, yeah, I call people every day. And I'm just curious, right? And especially in those early days, like, right? The rejection or like not hearing back, or maybe those things didn't happen for you. But I'd love to hear like when you first really went after connecting with folks, trying to build a business, like how did you handle the experience of hearing things that were hard to hear?
I've built two businesses now. So I built my husband's in 2010, and that business was profitable enough and big enough and had grown enough that 6 years later, I quit my corporate job, which was a very cushy corporate job that afforded us a wonderful life. But I was like, I don't want to work for anybody. I want to start my own business. And so in 2016, I started my own business. So I've created two businesses based off of the power of my network. I would not be able to do that if I took everything personally. So when it comes to rejection, say somebody says no to you, they're not ready to use your product or ready to buy your services or ready to make a strategic introduction or ready to refer you. I always say it's no for now. It's not no forever. Because here's the thing. Some people need time to get to know, like, and trust you. They're not going to make a strategic introduction for you or refer you if they don't know you, like you, and trust you. And that takes time. And that incubation period is different for everybody. Second thing, people do not need to buy your services or your product until they need it. So my husband, I can't force somebody to design a house if they don't need a house. Okay. So your job in networking is understand it's no for now. And it's also, I can't stress this enough, it's creating a network that is broad enough and deep enough that you can handle enough no's in a day because you're getting the same amount of yeses. In my second career as a professional speaker, I reach out to people all the time who don't want to hire me today, this month, this quarter, this year, but maybe they'll hire me in 3 years. That's happened. I just had a person reach out to me who saw me speak 5 years ago. It took 5 years for that lead to come in. But I am busy enough that I don't take no's personally because I have a machine. I have this networking machine, this branding machine that does fill my pipeline with work. You got to get over yourself. You got to get over this fear of rejection. Rejection sucks, but guess what? It happens to everybody. And it's going to happen to you over and over and over again. So start being a little Teflon to it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. This idea of being firm in yourself and playing the long game, I'm just kind of extrapolating, right? And I think especially with what you write in your book and your approach to networking, that it really is about a relational approach and not a transactional approach.
Yes.
And I think that's the formula. I think we've gotten away from that, right? Yes, of course you have objectives, right? You're building things, you want to get hired.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you treat it like tit for tat, what can you do for me? What can I do for you? Right? Like you miss the long game of that relationship. Like the fact that somebody called you 5 years, right, later is a testament to, I'm sure, what you've nurtured and also the feeling that you gave them when you were on that stage and you were doing your thing.
There's a couple of answers to that. The first is people always like to say life is short. Life isn't short. Life is long. Life is long. Your career is long. You will not build this network overnight. Don't try. You'll burn yourself out and you'll be a pretty shitty networker. Okay. Take it slow and steady wins the race. If you meet 2 new people every week, at the end of the year, you'd met 104 new people. Well, guess what? It's a lot of relationships to manage and nurture. Don't be like, oh my God, I listened to Julie Brown. She said I need a network. I'm going to make it this month. It's not going to happen. Life is long. Your career is long.
You also talked about, right, the breadth and the depth, right? And like, I'm constant, people who are in transition or they don't know what they want next, or even if they
Mhm.
do, right? Like that most often the most valuable connections in those cases are going to be not the close in ones, right? But the ones on the peripheral. So I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit because I really want people to understand that we have to surround ourselves with diverse people, diverse in all aspects in terms of what you do, your background, all the things. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. So I'm going to start by answering that question by saying if you are in transition, if you have been laid off, if you have been fired, stop worrying about it. 40% of workers are going to get fired at some point in their life or laid off or then part of a downsize. I've been let go multiple times for different reasons. I have been fired. I have been the victim of layoffs because of the recession. I have been the victim of corporate restructuring. And every single time I was let go, it was the best thing that happened to my career because it forced me to think about what I wanted. Was I just going through the motions? Was I just collecting a paycheck because it was a good paycheck and I wasn't happy? Like, where's the happiness in my career? So, this is where it comes to the network. Probably people have heard a statistic that about 70% of jobs are filled through networking. What they might not understand about that statistic is it actually means that only 30% of jobs are advertised. Because when companies are going to fill jobs, the first thing they do is ask their employees if they know anybody and ask their network if they know it about anybody. So that is what is considered the hidden job market because they are never going to be advertised. Most of those are going to be filled through word of mouth. If you are trying to figure out what your dream job is, where you want to work, what companies you want to work at, you have to go to your network and one, tell your network what you want. They can't help you get what you want if they don't know what you're looking for. And two, that you mentioned this depth of a network. When we think about our networking, we think about sort of the layers. If it were an onion and we were peeling layers off, like the outside layers might not seem that important. Studies have shown, and actually there was a study out of MIT called The Power of Weak Ties about the problem solving capabilities that happen in these loose ties that we have, the connection ability in these loose ties that we have. And let me define loose tie for some. Like say you go to a conference once a year and you see those people once a year. That would be a loose tie because you only see them once a year. Maybe it's somebody every 6 months you get together for coffee or lunch with them. That would be a seemingly loose tie. Maybe a loose tie is a colleague you used to work with every day, but then either of you have moved on and you haven't talked to that person in 3 or 4 or 5 years. That is a loose tie. If we tap into our loose ties when we are looking for our next job, statistically, our next opportunity will come from the loose ties. That's why they're so powerful.
Yes. I love that. And so for you listening who's maybe feeling like guilt or shame around having not stayed in touch with people, I say two things. Number one is they haven't stayed in touch with you either.
Yeah.
So why are you placing the blame on you, right? And secondly, the benefit goes both ways. I think sometimes when we're in a situation where we're looking for something or we have a goal, we need it, whatever it is, you need a new job, you need a new client, you need some information because you're lacking the knowledge in
Mhm.
something. It always goes both ways. And I think people forget that. And that's the relational part of it. And I think, it's like just yesterday I had made an introduction to a gentleman to two people. And he's like, well, what should I know? What should I do? And I said, just be yourself,
Mhm.
And then he mentioned, oh, I know somebody kind of high up in that company. I said, offer a connection because like it was a huge company. So you don't even, this guy may not even know your connection. And that
Right.
could be how, so it's just like, yeah, like don't forget you have value to add.
I think you bring up a really good point in what you just said. Is a lot of people think networking is an ambiguous activity. You go to this event, you meet some people. You go to this event, you meet some people. Somebody makes an introduction for you
Right.
instead of thinking of it strategically.
Mm,
Networking is one of the most strategic things you can do for your career, and most people don't put any strategy behind it.
mm.
So, what you just said as an example is you make an introduction to somebody, say into a company. You can prime that introduction with, I'm introducing you because of this, you have this in common and this in common. But that person that wanted that introduction, their job is to research that person further, to
Mm.
look at the company, what kind of work they're doing, who else works in that company, and dissect that introduction
Yes.
so that when you come into that introduction, you respect the introduction for what it's worth. And most people will never do that research portion of networking. When I was in construction, I was responsible for $150 million worth of new work every year in Boston proper. The year I left, I brought in $562 million worth of work. I don't know how to draw a line. I cannot build a building. If you ask me anything about construction, I have no fucking clue. But what I know is people, and
Mm.
I know how to do research so that people feel seen. And that's how I brought in $562 million worth of work.
Mic drop, y'all. And I love the stories that you share in your book about that, about the ways in which you do that and connect with people truly. And part of what you talked about, albeit briefly, but you talked a little bit about vulnerability as
Mm,
well in the connecting with folks. Like you said in the research, because I think we get caught up in the quantity game. We get
yeah.
so caught up in that I got to meet all these people and da, 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 and then we get transactional and we don't slow down and say, actually, it is about the quality of the connection and the quality of the interaction and really understanding a person and understanding also for understanding how you can add value and not just what you love to learn from their experience and perhaps even their network, right? So
Mm.
I'm curious for you to share what role you think vulnerability has in connecting and networking and building relationships.
I want to almost rephrase vulnerability as openness, as the ability to show the parts of you that don't sit on the resume. Because you know what our resume is? I did this and I did this, and look how great I am. And I have that. But what's under there is all the shit you were dealing with while you were making those leaps and bounds on your resume. What I want to know is what were you dealing with personally in your life, good and bad, while you were accomplishing all of those things. I want to know about your life because that's how we're going to connect. So I graduated college in 98. This was very much like corporate world. You still dressed corporate, you talked corporate, you did there was your work life and there was your home life and never the two shall meet. And when I realized that that was an inadequate way of connecting with people, and when I started
Mm.
connecting with people and saying, I am struggling with this is hard, this was, like whatever, that's when people really, that's when they see you. I once heard this phrase that said, the opposite of love isn't hate, the opposite of love is being ignored. And if people can't see you, they might ignore you because they don't understand every part of you and what you've been going through. And I think the more we can show of ourselves what we're tackling at the same time as how we're being successful, that's how we begin to build the relationships that will propel our careers.
If you haven't had a life changing moment in listening to this already, that's so beautiful. And I think not talked about enough, especially how you kind of phrase it at the end, right? It's like, it's not about being the victim. It's not about complaining. It's right. It's about just saying, hey, here's the truth. Like, I'm excited about what I'm doing and I'm
Mhm.
struggling. Like, and I don't know this thing.
It's the power of the and. I have this Peloton teacher that she always says it's the power of the and. I am doing this and I am scared. I am doing this and I'm not sure I'm doing it right. It's the power of the and. Because so many times we weren't allowed to say that what came after the and.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm always fascinated by what people omit in their stories, in their
Yep.
journey. Like whether it's like they are omitting it from their resume, they omit it from talking about it in interviews, they omit it from conversations because we're so multidimensional. And over and over, if I had a nickel for every time somebody came back and said, you know what, I just showed up as myself and I just
Mhm.
shared this thing that I don't usually share. And oh my God, it changed the whole dynamic of the
Yep.
relationship and the connection went so much deeper. And I love when people have those ahas. To your point, right? Like we've been conditioned and indoctrinated into compartmentalization for so long.
Yeah, how's that going for us?
Right. Yeah. Right.
How's that
Like,
going for us?
yeah. And, I think people gravitate and are magnetized to authenticity. And when you
Mhm.
are open to your point, right, whether we're using the word vulnerability or open or what have you, with obviously with discernment about what you're sharing, not everybody gets
Right.
to hear all the details of your story,
Right.
right? But I think we're just on the whole other end. Like I'm almost like, don't worry about that yet because we haven't
I
even
gotta tell
opened
you,
the door.
I mean, yes, yes, there are some things that maybe are the things you shouldn't say out loud. But I read your room,
Right.
read your audience. I now am I'm just shy of 49 years old, which means I'm firmly in perimenopause. Okay. And when I'm in a group of women, I'll be the first to say it. I'm like, okay, how's everybody's perimenopause going? Because the night sweats are killing me. And you should see what happens to that
Mm.
circle of women. Suddenly, everybody's talking about it and they're opening up about this thing that we are going to be dealing with for maybe 5 years or something together. So, okay, let's talk about it. It is so
Yeah.
funny when you can just read the audience and you can open that door a little. You open that door, somebody else is going to kick it wide open and be like, oh, girl, listen. you know?
Yes. And part of that is providing space and not being so caught up in your head about what
Right.
you're going to say and how you're positioning yourself. And just like you said, just pause and say, what's happening in this room? And what do people maybe need to hear? Or
Yep.
what's the elephant in the room?
Yep.
And how can I build a deep connection quickly versus stay at the surface? And one of the things I
Exactly.
love about your book is that very early on, right? You're like, you have all kinds of things that you can talk about that's not about what you do but about who you are and what you're interested in. Can you talk a little bit more about that concept cuz you'll do it way more justice than I will.
Yeah. So I started speaking publicly, professionally about networking in 2016 when I started my company. This was before I had created this tool. And people would come up to me after the end of my networking keynotes and say, I go to networking events and I don't have anything to talk about. Or I sit in a one on one coffee and I don't have anything to talk about. And I was floored. I was
Mm.
like, how is it possible that you have this big, bold, messy life? And then when you want to talk, you don't have anything to talk about. And then I realized that people weren't given permission to talk about non-boring shit at networking events. I'll just put it like that. You've been especially sort of when it was like when we think about like the good old boys way of networking, it was very much, what do you do? What are you gonna do for me? What can I do for you? Like it, and that's not how it works anymore. So I created this thing called the list yourself approach. And the list yourself approach is very, very simple. It is you make a list of 10 things that make you you, but you're not allowed to put on that list what you do for a living. You're not allowed to put on your list what you do for a living because we, especially as Americans, define ourselves by our professions. We indoctrinate kids really young by asking them over and over again, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like they have any fucking clue. Okay.
Mhm.
Second, you're in college. What is the first question you are asked when you're in college? It is, what is your major? And then you get out of college, and at every boring networking event that you go to, it's the first question you're asked, what do you do? And it is scientifically proven to be one of the most hated questions. And it's not because we hate our jobs. It's just the most boring question. It's a dopamine killer. So I created this list yourself approach so you could remember all of the things that are exciting in your life that have happened to you. An example list would, like, if I was going to say my list, like, I'm a dink, I'm a dual income, no kids, I'm a dink wad, I'm a dual income, no kids with a dog. I rescue dogs. My dog Madeline is a no limit soldier. She's a complete a hole, but I love her so much. She is my baby. I'm a runner. I run every morning. I live in Boston. I've run the Boston Marathon a number of times. I also have a ski house. I ski every weekend. You also have a house that you go to ski. I'm a world traveler. It is easier when you don't have kids. I just got back from Italy. I'm leaving for Barbados on Monday, which I'm going to go swimming with the turtles, who, if you don't know, you know now, Tosca, but turtles breathe out their butts. That's a little thing for you. Bring that to your next networking event and say that in your dopamine inducing conversation. I'm addicted to
Mm.
true crime podcasts. I'm actually addicted to anything true crime, Netflix true crime podcasts, like documentaries, docuseries, whatever. I love bourbon. I'm a huge bourbon enthusiast. Like all of these things. Big gardener. I love growing my own food and my own flowers and everything. Like that whole list. Those are really fun and interesting things to talk about. Also, those are things which you can make a human connection with somebody on and have easy follow up. So, for example, if I was in a conversation with somebody at a networking event that I hadn't met and I say something to the effect of, do you have any trips or vacations planned? And they say, yes, I'm going to Italy. I can say, oh my God, where? I just went. And they can tell me all about their trip. And then you know what? If they're going to any place that I've been to, I can send them an email and say, these are my top 10 experiences there. Or if I've never been to where they are, I would just Google it and find articles on it and be like, you know what? I've been thinking about your trip. I found this article. It might be useful as you plan your trip. Or maybe they're into true crime like me. And you're like, okay, what's your top three true crime podcasts? And they tell me, and I haven't listened to it yet, which is probably not going to happen because I listened to all of them. But say I hadn't listened to it yet. You know what I do on the drive home that night? I'd listen to an episode. And then the next day, I would email and be like, thank you so much for that recommendation. I listened to this episode. How crazy. What did you think of that episode? Finding these ways to follow up, which is so much easier, so much less anxiety than saying, I love talking about your accounting company. Maybe we can work together in the future. Yeah, good luck getting a response to that email, but you'll get a
Yes.
response to, I researched this article on where you're going. I'm so excited for your trip. I hope this is helpful. I'm going to check back in after you get back. I want to hear all about it.
Yes. And like personally, I don't know for you listening, like out of all the things you just shared about yourself, I'm like, oh, I'm going to talk about all that stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
it's exciting too for the receiver to be like,
Mhm.
oh, like tell me more about you and your life.
Tell me more about you is the one of the best things you can say in a conversation. Tell me more about you.
Yeah. And that's like putting the other person front and center, centering your audience and really
Mhm.
making it about them, going back to like making them feel heard and seen. And one of the things that I'm thinking about as you're talking is I'm thinking about the folks who are totally drained by this type of thing, like
Yeah.
introverts and however else you identify, just like, oh my God, the idea of making connections and having small talk conversations. And one of the things you say in your book, which I love, right? Which is like, you don't have to stay the whole time. And
Oh,
you can, right? It goes back to having a strategy. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts for folks who are just like, oh my God, this just sounds so hard. And how
okay.
do I,
Yeah.
how do I not get drained by this process?
Okay. Couple of answers here. One, figure out how much energy you need for this activity and make sure you are kind to yourself that day and put you in a position where you have the energy to go into that kind of activity. Two, relying on networking events, organized networking events as your only mode of networking
Mm,
is not going to serve you. Networking happens in so many different ways. Are networking events part of it? Yeah. But don't think that that's the only way you network. So, say you're going to go to a networking event, go to a networking event, have a goal. Say, I'm going to meet two new people or three new people. I'm going to have dopamine inducing conversations. I'm going to get their contact information. I'm going to have a conversation enough to make a follow up for tomorrow. And then I'm going to get out of Dodge because I'm tired and this is going to drain my battery. If the event is from 5 to 7, go from 5 to 6, do your goals and get out. Okay. Second, networking events are literally just one piece of the puzzle. There's networking events. There is joining organizations in which you sit on a committee, in which or a board. So you have committee meetings every week where you have an agenda, where you're working on problems, where you're working to do things together for that organization. That is a form of networking. You're always going to have that
mm,
shared experience of being on that committee or on that board together. A lot of times, introverted people or people who don't like networking, they don't like the non-structure of networking. Well,
mm,
if you sit on a committee or you sit on a board, there's a structure, but that is still networking. Another structured thing is when you are given strategic introductions or you ask for strategic introductions. One of the best ways to grow
mm.
your network is through these strategic introductions. So grow it that way. Networking events, one piece of the puzzle. Do I love them? Yeah, because I love food and wine, but they're only a piece of the puzzle.
Yes, I love that. And it makes me think of, right, like that you get to have the breath and say, what are the things that bring me joy? What are the things that fill my cup? And you have different objectives for different things, right? For different things that you attend. Maybe you're going to something because primarily you want to learn and it's for personal growth, but there's always networking opportunities there, right?
Always.
Or maybe you are going because you're like, man, I think there's a lot of people in this room that I'd love to connect with because they have some information or they have connections maybe that I need. But that finding the variety even and experimenting and exploring with what works for you and like present company included, and that could also be a mix of like in person versus virtual because there's so many
Mhm.
formats now.
Yeah.
And like for myself, being such a relationship person, like I had to go through the process of understanding like there are these differences and that I get to choose and I get to set myself up to not be drained, right? Whether that's giving myself permission when I feel like the energy is sucked out of me, like, okay, I don't have to
Yeah.
stay for that last half hour or last hour. And that I had to get over that like guilt I was feeling for like not sticking,
Yeah.
like, but it's a process, I think, of discovery.
It's like the same guilt as like when you're reading a shitty book and you feel like you have
Yes.
to finish it. I got an idea, guys. If you're reading a shitty book and you don't care about the ending, put it down and pick up a better book. It's the same mentality.
Yes.
If you're at an event and you're done and you're tired and you have completed your goals, get out. There will always be another networking event.
Yeah, like you get to have fun in the journey. This is what I say, like that it doesn't have to be like pulling teeth in this journey of meeting new people and surrounding yourself and finding the gems and your friends. And I love that chapter, where you talk about there's no such thing as work friends, right? Because it's
Right.
like, how are we thinking about the relationships that we're looking to connect with? And that goes back to, are we taking a transactional approach or are we really authentically building connections and relationships that go both ways? And it makes me think of a concept that you talked about in your talk and also is in your book, right? About these different circles, which goes to like what I'm saying, right? Which is you
Yeah.
have different, right? There's different aspects of this. And we also talked a bit about, right, the peripheral connections and how
Yep.
beneficial they are. So what can you share with the audience about looking at their network in this kind of in these different circles way that
Okay. So you're referring to the clusters.
yes.
Because there are circles, because I talk about circles and sort of like the onion layers, like how many people
Oh,
in your
right.
network. And then there's clusters. And so
Yes.
this actually came out of a study out of the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, Dr. Ron Burt. Fascinating gentleman. His language, I can't understand it because he's too smart. So I put it into Chat GPT and I'm like, what is he saying? So that's another thing. Like people, if people are if, like you're trying to like figure out what somebody's saying, just say Chat GPT, put this in dumb speak. And like, okay, that it works. Anyways, when I was reading through all this stuff, and this was years ago, I mean, so this was pre Chat GPT, so I actually had to read all of it. But, anyways, the study said when you look at relative performance in a career, relative performance can be broken down into three parts: promotion, compensation, how much money we make, and what kind of recognition we get in our industry. So, how much money we
Mm.
make, how many promotions, how we climb through the ladder, and then how much industry recognition we get. When we look at relative performance and you look at the design of a person's network, I'm going to talk in two terms here: closed and open. A closed network would be a network in which your network is just industry related, just career related, where you think I have to network in this industry because this is the industry I'm in, versus an open network, which would be clustered, which is networking is a whole life activity. So my network is, yes, it's my industry people. Yes, it's the people I ski with. Yes, it's the people in my neighborhood. Yes, it's the people that I do other hobbies with. Yes, it's the alumni association from the college that I went to. Yes, it's previous colleagues that I used to work with. All of these different clusters. If you look at the relative performance, the more clustered, the more open, the more diverse the network, the higher rate of relative performance. At the end of the study, they determined that 50% of a person's relative performance was based on whether or not they had an open, diverse network or just a small, tiny, homogenous, echo chamber of sameness network. Think about networking differently. Think about it as the people in your coffee shop. Think about it as the people you spend your weekends with. Think about it as your family. Think about it as all the different soccer moms. Think about it in a whole holistic sort of whole life way. And I say this because leads and information come from everywhere.
For me, it just feels very expansive to think about, oh, and these are also places that I could go and yeah, have different kinds of conversations with than I normally do.
Yep.
because we're at the beginning of the year,
Mm,
I'm curious, and this is your jam, right? Like, I'm
yeah.
curious, like, do you set bigger holistic networking goals for the year? Do you like how do you look at this from a kind of measurement standpoint or do you not measure like
This is a great question. I think my answer is different depending on who's listening. I have been networking for 25 years. It is so innate to me in what I do every single day. And I understand the value of it that it just becomes part of my daily process.
Mhm,
I don't have to write big, sweeping networking goals for myself because my network is so amazing and I know how to nurture it and I also know how to grow it. If you are just starting out and you're thinking, okay, I need to grow this network, my first
mm,
advice would be is analyze the one you already have.
mm,
Think about the network you already have. Everybody's already got a network. I bet you have clusters. I bet you have colleagues or industry organization connections, perhaps alumni, your friends, a neighborhood. Think about your network and then say to yourself, what is my goodwill with these
mm,
people? When was the last time I talked to them? Have I checked in on them?
mm.
What are the states of these relationships? And start with the network you already have, and then strategically use that network to grow it. We didn't talk about this, but there's this thing in social network theory called triadic closure.
Mhm.
And triadic closure simply means if you are introduced to somebody you don't know by somebody that you already know, the rate with which your relationship grows is faster because you share a mutual connection. Because the goodwill, because the trust and the like and the friendship of that person transfers over. Because you're not going to make an introduction to a dickhead to me. You're not going to be like, you know what, Julie, you really should meet
Right.
this fucking asshole over here. No, you're going to be, I want you to meet this person because they are
Right.
amazing and I love them and I love you and I want you two to know each
Yeah.
other. So when we take that power of triadic closure, we can really start to grow our network. Caveat is be strategic about it. Tell that person why you want that introduction. Understand who you want to be introduced to. Start with the relationships you've already invested in.
Yes. Yes, I love that and it really connects with something that I talk about with some frequency, right? Which is in this journey, we're not meant to do it alone. Like we don't have to do it alone. We have this rugged individualism approach to life. And that, yeah, like having those connections that can make connecting to others even easier is powerful. Like we talk about, like, I'll be your wing woman, right? Like,
Hmm.
or wing whoever, fill in the blank,
Yep.
right? But that it is super powerful for the reasons that you just said, also for your own like nervous system, and feeling better that you've got, hey, you've got an ally, you've got a partner, like you've got somebody looking out for you. We all need cheerleaders.
Yeah.
We all need people that are keeping their ears and eyes open, especially in the entrepreneurial world. But I don't care who you are. Like
Yeah.
we all need that. And I think it's also about exposure to new ideas and new imprints on what's possible for our
Hmm.
lives, for our careers. So much is like, we don't even know how big our dreams can be because we don't necessarily see what's possible. But by meeting new people and getting outside of our comfort zone and having conversations about things that we know nothing about
Hmm.
is what enables us to see new possibilities. I don't know if you agree with this as one of the benefits of just expanding networks.
I would not be a professional speaker if it wasn't for one person in my network. Her name was Mary. I used to work with her at an architecture firm back in recession times. And she watched me network and bring in work and all of that. And I was let go from that company during the recession. I don't think she was let go, but she went and moved to a different company. And she remembered me. And also because of my LinkedIn presence and my thought leadership, she followed me. And 6 years later, in 2016, when I started my own company, she asked if I would come and give a keynote on networking. And I said no, because I wasn't a keynote speaker. I wasn't a speaker. I'm still shocked this is on my bingo card, you know. Um, and I said no. And she came back to me and she said, listen, I don't know anybody who networks the way you do. I would really, could you do me a favor and just do this presentation for me? And I said yes at the second time. And that one presentation launched my entire speaking career, which is now an international speaking career. If it wasn't for her seeing in me that I could teach people how to do this, I wouldn't be a professional speaker. I wouldn't have a podcast. I wouldn't have published a book. I wouldn't be working on my second book. And I can guarantee I wouldn't be as happy as I am right now.
Mm.
Other people see in you what you don't see in yourself. And when they see it in you, believe them. Because I didn't
Yes.
believe it at first. I said no. I can't even imagine what would happen if she had taken that no and said, okay, I'll find someone else.
Oh, I freaking love that story.
Yeah.
It makes me think of, well, one of the reasons why I was like, this is my girl right here is because, like, within the first couple of pages, you were talking about inner critics. And I was like, because that's what I talk about, right, at nauseum. Because I'm sitting here going, like, you talk about networking. There's a lot of people that talk about networking. There's a lot of people that talk about inner critics, right? So, like, in this journey of expansion, in this journey of meeting new people, and all that crap that's getting piled. Am I enough? Am I
Mhm.
interesting? Am I boring? Da, da, da. And the inner critics that show up, especially in the situations that we're talking about, especially, right? You were asked to do something you never done. What
Mhm.
has been your biggest tool, I guess, in your toolbox for managing that inner critic in your life? Because you've taken leaps of faith. I mean, just the courage and tenacity and the belief in yourself is super inspiring to me. I'm sure
Yeah.
to everyone who's listening, but I'm sure that also has come with your fair share of doubt and inner critic nagging.
My husband always calls me fearless, and I am 100% not fearless. I feel fear every day. I just don't let it stop me.
Mm,
And I say to myself a lot, like, well, what's the worst that could happen? I bomb and then I get better. I don't know. Like, I learn from it and I get better. Like, we have to stop fearing failure. We have to look at failure as, well,
mm,
I won't do that again. How do I do it better? Or how do I,
mm,
change this or like whatever. Failure is just an opportunity to learn. When we're
mm.
younger, we don't worry about, we fall off our bike and we get back on, and we fall off our bike and we get back on, or we trip and we get back up. Like we learn as children that failure is a part of learning. But then as we get older, we think that failure is a form of doing something wrong or being
Mm.
less instead of saying, oh, failure is part of the process.
I love that for a couple of reasons. Number one is we often have these fears in our head that we don't actually play out and see really what would we do,
It
right? Or
doesn't
like,
usually
would it,
happen.
right? It doesn't usually happen, right?
It
And then
doesn't
even if it
usually
did
happen.
happen, you're like, oh, well, okay. If that really did happen, I
Yeah.
guess what I would do is, X fill in the blank. You talk about failure and I think what you're really saying, and I use this, I don't use language around failure, but I use language around learning forward. Like, what is
Yeah.
truly a failure, right? And reframing that and
Yeah.
to say, like, because failure has such a negative connotation, right? So how do we look at what didn't work as helping us in the
Yeah.
redirection of what did work?
I just think it's funny because I think you said something. Well, what if it doesn't work? A lot of our brain goes to, well, what if it doesn't work? What if it doesn't work? What if it doesn't go right? Every time you say that to yourself, every time you say, well, what if it doesn't work? Or what if it doesn't go right? I want you to switch it and say, what if it all happens the way it's supposed to? What if it all works out? What does this look like if it all works out? What are the pieces that happen if it all works out? Our brains go to negative. I don't know why. It's some sort of evolutionary thing that's happened in us. Probably, kept us safe from wildebeests and stuff. But like, we probably had to think in very sort of drastic, dire terms in order to evolve. But now we are not being chased by wildebeest and buffaloes and whatnot. Like, so start changing the narrative in your mind to, well, what if it all goes right?
I love that. And I love that as kind of as we're, wrapping up. It's like, right, how do we reorient, especially so early in the year, to think different thoughts, to approach our lives differently, to approach networking differently? Like, what if it all
Mm-hmm.
goes right? What if I meet my next best friend this year, this
100%.
afternoon, right? And we covered so much ground. And so, like, before, before we get into like how can people get in touch with you or how can people learn more about what you educate people on, I want to ask, what did we not cover that you feel like you really want people to know? I know. It's like
How many more hours do you
I know.
have?
It's an impossible question, just like honoring whatever comes up for you.
A lot of times people think of networking very negatively because it is about asking for something you need. It is building relationships to grow your success, essentially. What if, in your process of building your network and hoping for the things that you need to succeed out of your network, you spend as much time helping somebody else succeed, being that person in their network that they say to themselves, I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't met that person. Because I have lots of people in my network that I think to myself, if I hadn't met Mary, I wouldn't be a speaker. If I hadn't met Tracy 20 years ago, I wouldn't have had a boast bitch my entire career. Some people call them wing woman. I call them boast bitches. Like, if I hadn't met Jackie, I wouldn't have started the podcast. Like, all of these things. As you are taking from your network, look at the riches that come in and give them back.
I freaking love that. How do we give back? How do we be in gratitude? And how do we recognize our own power to make a difference in the lives of other people and be generous? You know, I think that's what you're saying is like, be generous with your light, with what you have to offer, because there are people that need it that you may not even know about. And I think the one thing that I'll add on to that, right, is our intuition is so powerful. And I'm often getting hits about, let me reach out to this person. And, or, oh, I think I want to connect these two people. I always have done that. And I always have like really honored it. But I think it's been only in the past maybe 5 years where I've really honored that is a superpower. And even if I don't know what happens, that's part of my magic. And I think that a lot of people have that magic, but they dismiss it or they don't act on it. And I think it's a missed opportunity.
This is the difference between intention and action. You can intend to send a thank you card. You can intend to send flowers. You can intend to check in on somebody. Intending will get you nowhere. Action will get you everything. And the way to do action is to do it in the moment, which means you cannot procrastinate action. If you in your mind say, I should send that thank you card, send it now. Sit down and write it, because that is the difference in moving intention to action.
Yes. For you listening, what are you going to action as a result of this conversation? What do you want to do when you hear the very last second of this podcast? What is it you want to take action on? I just want to plant that seed. Thank you so much for that prompt too, Julie. I mean, I knew this was going to be freaking awesome. Like, and I knew I wasn't going to want it to stop.
Yeah.
Again, I really am inspired by your journey, by your stories, by your sharing openness and vulnerability, because people need to hear about the truth of the messy middle of the hard times. It's not always like, not all roses, which we're led to believe in social media these days. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
I'm so excited to share this with my audience. And how can people get a hold of you? What's the best way they can connect and network with you?
Yeah. So I would say I spend most of my social media time on LinkedIn. So I am Julie Brown BD on LinkedIn. And the best way to connect with me is to reach out on LinkedIn and say that you saw me here, that you met me here. Make that triadic closure. Let me know how you found me. The second way is via my website. There's lots of forms if you want to hire me to speak, or, you just want to reach out and ask about coaching. And that is also juliebrownbd.com. Those are two main places to find me.
Amazing. And I'll make sure we put those in the show notes as well to make it easy for folks.
Or my book on Amazon.
Yeah, absolutely. Get the look, let me just, I'm going to give like an unsolicited plug on the book. Like I said, like connecting is part of my jam. It's part of my superpowers. And I wanted to read this book in honor of like maybe remembering things I've forgotten, or maybe even validation of what I'm doing.
Yes.
Yeah, that's super helpful. But also, let me tell you what the unexpected thing was inspiration to remember the power of this process and to remember my joy in it. Because sometimes we can just get jaded by how people respond to us or what's happening, whatever. But it really was, for me as an extrovert, as somebody who loves to network, it was so additive to me. So I definitely highly recommend it. It's an easy read. It's quick. You can do it. It's so quick, right? You can do it in a day. So I highly recommend you picking this up. It's only going to serve you for sure. So there's my 5-star review on your book. But all right. Well, once again, thank you for joining the Unlock Lab. I'm just so thrilled that I just was able to have this conversation with Julie. Look, I'm recording this on the first week of January, and I'm starting my new year with this interview. And I love interviews because I love to introduce you to new ways of thinking about things, to ideas that will help you be successful in your goals and new ways of thinking that will lift you up rather than listening to inner critics that may be tearing you down this time of year. So I hope you enjoyed it just as much as I did. And I hope you check out Julie Brown and connect with her on LinkedIn, because I guarantee you have so much more to learn from her and her way of thinking. So thank you for tuning in to the Unlock Lab. I look forward to seeing you next time, and ciao for now.